Hi, I'm Ilaria Berenice, an artist and a lover of stories that inspire and connect different cultures. This episode is particularly special because it marks the beginning of the English version of my podcast. While I usually record my interviews in Italian, I'm excited to now reach a broader audience by sharing inspiring stories in English as well. As always, my focus is on sharing unique and inspiring stories of remarkable people. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to Bill and Janet, an incredible American couple living in Portugal, where we are now. Let's dive into their journey. From Colorado to Portugal, could you start by telling us a bit of your background? What brought you to where you are today?
That's a really good question because there's almost no way to connect these two dots. A lot of very bad things have happened in my life, but they were all essential to get here. And if I took one of them away, I wouldn't be sitting here with you because that's how I got here. All I can say is I've had this wonderful life so far of being in a position where the things that happened when I was young were the things that I thought would ruin my life forever. I didn't think anything good could come from them, and they are the things that actually turned everything around, and they have made the best things in life. So that's, I think, the way I would probably try to explain to you how to look at my life is that all of my liabilities, which is the negative things, have all turned into my assets, the positive things. And I needed every one of those bad things to turn into the good things. So, and living here with Janet in Portugal after everything with starting Blue Star, and we'll go into that, and all these other things, is just another example of that. It's all these good things that came out of things that were negative.
What inspired you to start a company focused on, you say, recycling electronic materials, right?
Right. So that's another one of the things that I didn't have an idea to start a recycling company, and I didn't have an idea to hire people with disabilities to work at that recycling company. So it all came together as an unplanned or an accidental discovery. The end of 2007, I was 54 years old. Janet and I didn't have any money left. I was out of work. I was in the telecommunications industry. And if you remember, in 2007, 2008 was our recession. And there were no jobs, and my company sold out to another company, and I couldn't find a job. No one wanted to hire me, and I thought I was pretty good. I had been in the industry for almost 30 years, and I had some success. I had been a regional manager for big companies, but no one wanted to hire me. I think some of it was my age. Some of it was the economy. I was at the lowest I'd ever felt. I thought about suicide for the first time in a long time, because I had never experienced that feeling of no one wants you. But I look back now, and I needed to experience that because, as it turns out, that these people that I employed at Blue Star have that feeling every day when they're growing up. No one wants them either. I had never felt that. And I needed to experience myself what it feels like to know that you have value, but no one wants it. No one's asking. And no one would even interview me for a job. And I couldn't believe it. I was healthy. I could do work. I thought I was employable. So I took the worst job I've ever had, which was the only job I could find was running the program where I met these 4 young men. The pay was horrible. It was the lowest pay I ever earned. It was about the same amount of money I made when I was in high school. And here I am, 54 years old, and I'm taking a job with the lowest pay. And I didn't know anything about running a program like that, but the pay was so bad they couldn't find anyone to run it. So they hired me. Now, the interesting thing is the only reason they hired me, besides my willingness to work for nothing, was I have a brother named Paul who was born with developmental disabilities. And so I grew up with him and understanding a little bit about him. And when they were interviewing me, I said, I don't know anything about running a program for people with disabilities. And I said, I don't have any degrees or any certifications. And they said, well, do you know of someone with a disability? And that's when I said, yes, my brother. And they go, well, that's good enough. And they hired me. And it was the worst job I ever had. I showed up, not only was the pay bad, but it was in a building that smelled bad. You walk in the door, I had 65 adults in that program that were developmentally disabled. They were unhappy. The staff that worked for me was even unhappier than them because they were being paid less than I was. So here I am, and I'm 54, I'm taking a job, and I just needed a job, so I took it. And a couple of weeks before that, I'm not religious, but I told God, I said, I'm ready to do anything. I said, I quit. I can't manage my career anymore. I've run it into the ditch because no one wants to hire me. So I said, God, I'll do anything. I'll do anything. I don't care what it is. So when they offered me the job, I thought, I can't go back on that promise I made. So I took the job. And so about over the next 2 months, someone had set up a table like we're sitting at right here and put 4 of these young men, they were in their mid-20s.
Autistic, right?
Right, yeah, they have, yes. And I didn't know that then, though. I hadn't looked at their files, but I noticed that they were very good at taking things apart. Somebody was just bringing in old things that people had thrown away. And what happened was I noticed that they were very good at what they were doing. And I thought, wow, I didn't know anything about autism, but I looked at their files and I saw that they were diagnosed with autism. A couple of them had other diagnoses as well, some physical problems, but some other things. But they all had a common thread of having autism. And it occurred to me that something was different. They seemed to enjoy doing things that I would find boring, which was doing the same thing all day. And they were very comfortable. And if you've met most people with autism in public, they're not very comfortable because they receive too much stimulus, too much data, and it overloads them, and they get so uncomfortable. And here were these 4 young men sitting there, and they were just in heaven. They were just tinkering. And they had made a system out of taking things apart. They had taught themselves how to do it. No one taught them anything. They were, again, not being paid, not being trained, but I noticed they were very good at it. And I Googled autism, and what I read was 2 things. One, people with autism have a tendency to like things that are activities that are systematic, procedural, tactile, repetitive, just doing the same thing all day long. And the second thing I wrote was less than 5% of people with autism had a job, a real job. And yet over 75% of people with autism can work and want to work. I read that. And I sat at my desk and I just said, this is ridiculous. These 4 men have skill. They should be doing something where they get a paycheck, where they experience that feeling of value, right? And I went home, I sat at our kitchen counter, and I typed a business plan to create a recycling company. And Janet said to me, what are you doing? And I told her, and she said, but you don't know anything about recycling. I said, I know, but I said, I'm going to learn. So we took these 4 young men and we put them in their warehouse, and they were being paid minimum wage to take computers apart. Now here's the best part of the story for me. I got to sit there and watch 4 human beings change completely. Again, they had all been through special ed in their schools, but because no one wanted to hire them, they were coming to this babysitting program instead of going into starting their life. This is their first real job. They came to work, they got their gloves on, they got their tools, they clocked in, and I could see this change. They were sitting up, they were acting like men. They quit acting like boys because they were treated like children before. Now I was treating them like men, and they acted like men. And everything about them changed, mentally, physically, emotionally, everything changed. And they were right before my eyes over a period of about 3 months. I've never seen anything like that. And one of the mothers, Nathan's mother, is the one that said, Nathan's been dependent on me for everything, dependent on everyone else his whole life for everything. She said, for 8 hours a day, you depend on him. And I went, oh my God, this is why disability services don't work. We give them charity, we treat them like patients. But that's not what a human being really needs. A human being needs to feel valued. And for the first time in their lives, they had a purpose and a reason to get up and go to work. And they were doing something they were very good at. And they knew it. And self-esteem grows from here out. It doesn't, we made the mistake of thinking you could pat someone on the back and tell them how great they are. They don't feel better when you tell them. When you feel better about yourself, it's because you're doing something. No matter what it is, it doesn't matter. But they were doing something, and everything about them changed. So that's how this whole thing got started. And I had no money at that point. We had run out of money, and I wanted to start a regular business, but I couldn't. So a friend of mine said, hey, there's a truck sitting in a parking lot in Colorado Springs, and on the side of the truck it says Blue Star Electronics on it. And he said, do you know who they are? I said, I have no idea. He goes, well, I know the guy that owns the building that it's parked in front of. He said, why don't you call him? And I said, okay. And I called him. His name was Tony Fanant, and I called Tony and I said, hey, I'm interested in that truck, and I'm interested in what you're doing, because it sounds like you're doing something like what I'm doing. He goes, no, he says, that truck belonged to a business that rented one of my properties. They went out of business, and they left in the middle of the night owing me a lot of money, and all I have is the truck, and I have a warehouse full of old electronics that they left behind. And I said, I'll be right over. And I went over, and he and I sat down. He gave me a tour of his factory. He owned a metal finishing business. And he was a really good man. I liked him, and I liked the way he ran his company. We went back to his office, and he said, why are you interested in the truck? So I told him what I just told you. And he said, would you come back tomorrow to tell this story to my wife, Mary? I said, sure, but why? He said, well, Mary and I own this company together, and we make all of our decisions together. So I said, sure, I'll come back. So I came back, and we went to coffee, and I told her this story about these men. And they went off and came back, and they said, we're going to give you the truck, we're going to give you the building full of electronics, and here's a check for $250,000.
Wow.
And I said, what? I thought I was on Candid Camera, which is an old series in the United States where, right? Remember that? I said, nobody does that. I said, you don't know me, you don't know anything about the guy. And they looked at me and they said, we don't have a child with a disability, but we believe that anyone who wants to work should have a chance to go to work.
You inspire people. Yeah.
She said, go make this happen. And all I remember saying was, I hope you guys don't expect your money back, because I said, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just starting to learn. And they said, just go make it happen. Sometimes people think I'm crazy because I say, everyone waits to start a business until they know everything, until they're sure they're going to be successful. And we're a very good example of, if you have a hunch that's strong enough, just do it. And I was very lucky to get this family to make that kind of investment. And that's something that not everyone will experience. But we just went and did it, and we learned. It took forever. We're probably still learning it. We're learning the recycling industry. It's a very hard industry. There's no profit in it. That's where our guys made the difference. They showed up to work every day, got all their work done. They didn't miss work. They didn't get hurt. And my secret weapon against my competitors was I had a workforce that was better. And yet, all of my competitors looked at them as being worse because they were disabled. You see, this is what happens when you judge a book by its cover. Because you look at a person with autism, you say, I don't want to hire that person, because they look funny, they sound funny, they're very uncomfortable, right? They never look you in the eye when you first meet them. So employers are put off by them. But what we did was, I had an idea. I said, everyone in their life was invested in what was wrong with them. Starting with the doctor that diagnosed them when they were 2 years old. That doctor meant well, but what that doctor said was, your son has autism spectrum disorder, and here's what's wrong with him. And here's all of his deficits. And mom and dad went home and cried and said, oh no, we have a son with autism. And I understand that perfectly, because my mom and dad cried when they got the diagnosis for my brother. No parent wants to have a disabled child. And then, one after another, people come into their lives, not because they are interested in them, but they are there to deliver services so they can get a check from the government for doing that. So almost every person that comes into the life of a person with a disability is paid to be there. And they tend to exaggerate the deficits. Why? Because I can build
something from it.
I can build the government longer if you stay sicker longer. If you become dependent on me, I can make money. You'll never get better, but I'll make more money. And this is what happens to everyone with a disability. Everyone in their life is interested and focused in what's wrong with them. Here's the beauty of Blue Star Recyclers. I didn't receive any money from the government. I would not take any money from the government. We basically said, we're going to stand on our own, and we barely made it. I mean, it took us 3 years just to break even. And we thought we were going to go out of business a couple of times. But that allowed me to do my job was when they came in to interview for a job, was to find out what was right with them. They would start to tell me, and their parents would start to tell me what was wrong with them, and I said, time out. I don't care. And they would look at me funny like, what do you mean you don't care? I said, I don't care what's wrong with your son. I have absolutely no interest or investment in what's wrong with your son. There's a lot of other people that do. What I care about is what's right with him. And my job is to find out what's right with him. What can he do? What is he interested in? And how can we match that innate skill up with a paying job? So we did an interview that's totally backwards from most employers. A person with autism can't sit across the desk and chat with you and tell you how good their resume is and lie to you about what they're good at, right? Like most of us do. So I said, let's leave the office and go out to the warehouse, to the floor where all the work's being done. And I would just walk around the warehouse with them, and I'd say, have a look at all the things we do, and when we get back to my office, I'm going to ask you a few questions. So we did. And we'd take about maybe 30 minutes. Come back to the office, and I'd say, did you see anything out there that you liked? And always they'd say, yes. I said, what is it? And they would pick one. They say, I want to take apart computers. I want to test memory chips. I want to stack TVs on pallets. I want to unload equipment off the trucks. I want to sort wires. Because we had all these different things we did. And I'd say, okay, that's where you're going to start, is that job. And I would only ask two questions. One was, do you really want to work? Because sometimes they didn't want to work. Everyone else wanted them to work, but they didn't want to. And I only had one rule, that if you don't want to work, I can't help you.
Yeah.
Because if you have to want to work. And almost all of the people, I mean, I only had a couple that didn't want to work. And they say yes. And I say, can you work? And they go, what do you mean? I said, can you physically get up in the morning and come here and do your best? And some could not do that. They were either physically disabled or mentally unable to do it. So we couldn't hire everyone. There were some that couldn't work, but most could. So if they wanted to work and they could work, I offered them a job, and here they come. And then I got to watch that whole process with one after another, where first day they come in looking at the floor. They wouldn't talk to me, and we hugged, and they wouldn't even shake my hand. And but we sit them down and they get started. And then 2 or 3 months later, I come in there and they come up and give me a hug, and they start talking, and they start talking to their coworkers. And here's what we found, Ilaria, is that once you have self-esteem based on doing something, it unlocks you. And so mom and dad would come in and go, that's not my son. He's never ever done that. He's never walked up to somebody and given them a hug and started talking to them. And I said, well, that's what happens when we find the thing that we're supposed to do, right? It's magic. But we're so concerned with providing services to people with disabilities and focusing on what's wrong with them, we missed it. We missed the talent that's there. There's just, oh my God.
That they are a human being. No?
Yeah, yes. And here's the thing. If you focused on what was wrong with Bill Morris, you would find, number one, you'd find a lot that was wrong. And I would never have ever been able to do this because you would have said, well, you could never do that. Because I didn't have a college degree. I don't have a degree in working with people with disabilities. I don't have any experience with recycling. So people would have said, you can't do this.
So you started with 4 men with autism
In
spectrum.
2008 was when I met them, and we opened Blue Star in 2009. And we added 2 in 2008. So I started Blue Star with 6 people with disabilities.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it's ended. Well, it not ended because it still exists.
Still going, yeah.
And now, how many?
Well, Blue Star, we got up to 5 locations in the United States with about 65 people. But then when COVID hit, we lost our sources of material. It really hurt us because companies, instead of sending us their old computers, they were sending them to their employers to do virtual officing,
Smart working and
right.
stuff. Yeah.
And totally understandable, but we really, really lost our material volume. Then we had to close all but Denver. So Denver is the only location left. It has 40, my son took over Blue Star. I think he said we have 42 employees now. But more importantly, in the last 5 years, we've trained about 27 other employers to do what we do, and they have turned around and collectively employed about 250 people with disabilities.
Wow.
In the United States.
That's huge, yeah.
Chile. So, and it's all from just sharing what we've learned to employers that are willing to take this chance. And honestly, employers are not doing this. They shouldn't do it for philanthropic reasons or charity. They've learned that they can get a really, really good employee that shows up every day, because we track this over the years, we have the lowest absenteeism rate, the highest attendance rate, the lowest lost time accident rate in our industry. We had one lost time accident in 10 years. In our industry, most recyclers have one lost time accident a week. And so you would say, that doesn't make sense. People with disabilities should get hurt more in the workplace. The answer is no, and the reason is people with autism follow the rules. You say, here's safety procedure 1, 2, 3, 4. They never, ever deviate. People without disabilities get bored, restless. They cut corners and they get hurt, right? So here's the greatest gift of the whole thing was we stumbled on a workforce that's custom made for manufacturing, recycling, distribution, anything that has tasks that are repetitive. I've said this now a couple times to people that I think the Industrial Revolution started somewhere around the 1700s in terms of really getting off the ground. And what we did was we went out and took a bunch of poor farmers and brought them into buildings and made them do the same thing every day, all day, and they hated it. But it was a paycheck. We've been hiring the wrong people for that from the very beginning. No one likes working in a factory. I'm sorry. I haven't met one person that says, boy, this is the best job ever. Here's what they say. Well, the money's good. The benefits are good. But they don't like doing this all day, right? This is what happens in automation and manufacturing. You're just doing these things all day and human beings that are not autistic, we get bored, restless, and we start making mistakes. And it's not work that most people really like, but we forced ourselves to go to work in those jobs. Meanwhile, here's one out of every 5 adults in the United States has a diagnosed disability. And meanwhile, they're sitting on their couches in their house and no one will interview them. And they are actually better at the work than the employers have right now in their employers. So this is the thing that I think that somehow we're making a little progress. The hardest thing in the world is to change our thinking, is quit feeling sorry for people with disabilities and patting them on the head. That's not what they need. It makes us feel better, but it doesn't make them feel better. What we really need to do is say, what are you good at? What do you like to do? And find something that they can do in the community, even if it's not for pay. It doesn't matter, just to get them out of their houses and come into the community.
Give the dignity to feel useful for
useful.
society.
I think being useful is the most important thing there is, and we all need it. The disability system is like every other government entity. It meant well when it started, and it grew into something that has to feed itself. And the only way it can continue to grow is by making people dependent on it. Here's my proof of that. Since 2008, when we first opened the first part of it, so now 16 years, I haven't received one referral from a government agency to employ a person that's receiving benefits. So they should be sending people or companies like Blue Star to people to hire so they quit using as much benefits, right? But they won't do that because, in the United States at least, because if they send me someone that's on benefits, they don't get to bill the government anymore for them. So that's the insidious part of what's wrong with the system is that the very system that was created to serve people with disabilities is now their greatest
obstacle.
Yes, it's their greatest enemy.
Janet, you work together with Bill in this company. Do you have some anecdote from your personal point of view? Do you have some story to tell?
I pretty much was part of the company from the beginning.
Yeah.
I worked as a volunteer for the first several years, and then I went to work full-time. But I think the stories that mean the most to me are the very personal stories. As Bill would be the first to tell you, I thought he was crazy when he took this job. And I didn't understand. He would come home and he would say, these guys need to go to work. I want to make it my mission to put them to work. This is what I want to do. And I didn't understand what was so important about 4 young men putting them to work. You know, what kind of an impact was that going to make? But I went along with it. And I was kind of on the outside. I wasn't part of the day-to-day workings of Blue Star. I didn't work with the young men and women at first. And it wasn't until I started working with them on a day-to-day basis that I found out what amazing people they are. And I was, to be honest, I think I was like a lot of people. I was a little afraid because I didn't know what to expect. And I'm the kind of person that likes to always know what to expect in life. And so when I first started working with them, they were autistic. and by definition, they aren't very socially engaging. And so it was difficult for me to, because I'm kind of a shy person, so it was difficult for me to go start conversations with them and go up and shake their hands. But little by little, I got to know them personally. And I think the first revelation for me was when we were doing an event, and we had taken several of the young men to this event with us, and it was kind of an event to show our appreciation to them. And at the end of the event, one of the young men who very rarely would even speak to me came up to me, and for some reason he threw his arms around me and gave me a hug. And it brought tears to my eyes. It still brings tears to my eyes. This was Richie, and Richie was this very tall, huge man, and he was just like a bear. And when he put his arms around you, you just felt it, and it was just a big bear hug. And so we started hugging every day. When he would see me at work, he would practically come running, and we would hug every morning. And so it became where it wasn't just Richie, but it became a procession. I would be sitting in my office, and Richie would come in and give me a hug, and Lee would come in and give me a hug. And one by one, at least 75% of the workforce would come in and give me a hug. And that was the very best part of my day of any year. And still, it's a very warm feeling, and I can't completely describe how that felt. They all, of course, became very real to me, and I felt very maternal towards them, and I just loved them. And I know they love me in their own ways. And I'll have one more. And the very last day that our Colorado Springs location was open, we had to say goodbye to all these people, and it was very, very hard. And one by one, they came over and gave me a hug. And there was one young man who wouldn't hug me the entire time. And that was okay, because he just didn't feel comfortable with that. He wasn't.
He didn't hug anybody.
He didn't hug anybody. And as I was turning away, after I said goodbye to everybody, including him, he came up to me and he says, "Well, I guess it's time to give you a hug." And he threw his arms around me and gave me a hug. And I lost it.
And that
I
is
started
very
crying.
rare, because as far as I know, I'm very ignorant, but people with autism don't like touch,
No,
contact.
usually no. No.
Usually not, no.
But, it's another thing where if they get to know you and they feel safe, and then it's okay. But on their terms, and that's okay too. I would never, ever have gone up and hugged any of them without asking them first or without knowing that it was okay.
Yeah.
So that's my stories.
Bill, before you told me that from something bad, something beautiful is born. This is a very inspiring concept. Reminds me of an Italian song that say that from manure, flowers are born.
That's right.
Can you expand this concept? This is related to your personal story, right?
Yeah. This is really, I think, the more time that goes by, the more I realize how perfect this all is. But you can only experience it after the fact. As it's going on, none of us can see it. But once you get towards the end of something, you look back and you see this beautiful thing happen. And that is, in the case of Blue Star Recyclers, that it is, the outcome of it is all the way back to when my brother was young, when he was a teenager. Back when he was born in 1945, there was no diagnosis. He had brain damage when he was born because he was born during World War II, and he was delivered by my mother's doctor, who was taken out of retirement, and he gave my mother too much ether, so she couldn't help in the birthing process, and he lost oxygen. And so he had brain damage when he was born. Some of his brain worked and some of it didn't. And he had seizures as a baby. Growing up with him, as he got older, he was angry. He was one of those people with a developmental disability who knew that he was different. Sometimes we found those are the ones that are the most angry because they can see the difference. And I have another older brother who's closer to his age. Paul is his name, the one with the disability. And Paul was watching my other brother, Craig, and seeing that Craig was in high school, was going off on dates with girlfriends. He had worked at a grocery store and he bought a car, and then he went to college, and then he went into the military. And my brother couldn't do any of those things. He couldn't tell time. They pushed him through school. He could read a little, but he couldn't retain anything. He had no short-term memory. So he watched my brother go off, and the older he got, the angrier he got. Well, my mother and father didn't understand what was wrong with him. No one did in those days. And they let Paul babysit me. I was 10 years younger than he was. So when Paul was 15, 16 years old, Paul did some pretty good damage to me. My brother was a typical young man, but he had no way to express his sexuality because he had those needs, but no one wanted to talk about that. So what happened was he took that out on me. And that was a secret in my family, and no one wanted to talk about it. And when I went to talk to my parents about it, I grew up in a family with an alcoholic father, and in an alcoholic family, you don't talk about those things because everyone's afraid of making the father angry, and then he gets drunk. And so I grew up with having the worst thing in my life was that brother, was Paul. And he ruined all of our holidays because whenever we got together, he would have a tantrum. And then when I was in my 20s, he sexually molested another little boy and was sent off to prison and for 10 years. And I didn't see him for 10 years. So, and I was so ashamed of him. I was so angry at him. He did some other things that that Janet is aware of, that as I was growing up, that it was just humiliating stuff. So I would have told you that the worst thing in my life was having Paul as a brother. That was my liability. That was my biggest deficit, was him. And I was ashamed of him, and I wished that he had never been born. So this is the miracle of this is that this is another story. This gets very involved, but so I am a recovering alcoholic. I got sober in 1989, and I went into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I got sober. Part of sobriety, when you get sober, is you have to do some work. And I had to take the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. There's 12 steps. And one of the steps is you make an inventory of your resentments, of your fears, and some other things. And I didn't even have Paul on my resentment list for probably the first 15 years, because I didn't think it was okay to resent him. Because my mother had always said, it's not his fault, he's retarded. Mm. So I didn't think I could resent Paul, but I did. And it wasn't until a man that he was my AA sponsor in 2007, I finally sat down with him and told him what happened with Paul when I was little. And by the way, that memory, I had repressed it up until about 1991 to 92. It started coming back, and I started seeing all this stuff that had happened. And I didn't know what to do with it. I just sort of kept it. It was one of the things, though, that fed my alcoholism, because it created a lot of discomfort, and I threw alcohol at it. The reason that this is all involved is that when I finally sat down with my sponsor and told him what had happened and that I resented Paul, he did the work with me that allowed me to let that resentment go. I couldn't forgive him because I don't know how to do that, but I just let the resentment go. I finally said, we have a saying in the United States, it's just, I let him off the hook. In other words, I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life being angry at him. Mm-hmm. And I finally was able to let him go. And when that happened, this is what's so amazing. It was only a matter of weeks before the whole thing with Blue Star started to materialize. I had to let go of the hatred I had toward my brother, and I just set it down on the ground. I didn't do anything other than that. I just set it down, and I felt better by doing that. But as soon as I did that, within weeks, I was introduced to this job. And again, at the time, I didn't think it was a very good job. I was very unhappy then, but it was only because I knew Paul that I got that job. I still didn't understand what was happening. And then after all these years, 16 years later, I look back and I go, because of Paul in my life, because of having him as a brother, I got a job where I met 4 young men who had the same kind of problems Paul did. And I got to find out what was right with them. 16 years later, there's 250 other men and women working that never had a job before because of Paul. And that's impossible. So how do you get from there to here? It's impossible. In the United States especially, we have this thing where we say, you should never have anything bad happen. You should avoid all pain. You should avoid failures. You should avoid all those bad things. And the problem when we do that is we miss opportunities for the very best things to happen. When I was doing the step, part of step 4 says, you give your resentment, you say who you're resentful at and why. And then there's the second question, which is, what is your part in the resentment? Mm-hmm. And I use that resentment because when you have a narrative that says I'm a victim, you can do anything. You can blame all your problems on everyone else. Mm-hmm. And my alcoholism and all the things in my life that went badly, I somehow in my mind said, this happened because of Paul, of what he did. So I didn't tell other people that, but I believe that internally, that was my way of letting myself off the hook. And I finally had to realize that Paul wasn't the cause of my problems. I was using him as a way of blaming someone else. Mm-hmm. So the reason this thing is so complex is that because I had to hit a point where I finally had to let him go. And then when I did that, it opened the way up to seeing something I'd never seen before. And I couldn't have seen these 4 young men the way I saw them if I still hated Paul. It would have been impossible. I would have viewed them exactly the way I viewed Paul.
So letting go this story with your brother changed the energy, and so things moved in another direction.
Yes. But see, I think this is the problem we become a diagnosis-based society again, where what happens, we'll go see a therapist. I saw a therapist, and the therapist says, here's what's wrong with you. You have PTSD, you have repressed memories.
They put labels in your face.
Yeah, they put a label on you. Here's the problem though. Now all you've got is someone to blame or something to blame for what's wrong with you, and you've got a piece of paper that says it. And you can get some prescriptions, or you can get whatever you get. The best thing about AA sponsors was they didn't say things like that. They said, oh well, what are you going to do now? And what Bob said to me, my sponsor in AA, that changed everything. He looked at me and he said, Bill, what did you expect? I said, what do you mean? He said, that was a terrible thing for a young boy to go through. He goes, yeah. But he goes, what did you expect? I said, I don't think that should have happened to me. He said, why? I said, and this is so stupid, I said, because Wally never did that to Beaver and Leave It to Beaver, which was an old TV series where an older brother was really nice to his younger brother. And Bob reminded me that was a television series. It wasn't real life. He said, our biggest problems are that we expect we expect our lives to be easier, to not have problems, to not get hurt. But that's an unreasonable expectation. Being human, we're going to get hurt. We're going to go through some very, very bad things, and they're going to be very painful. And they're not to be avoided. You can't run from them. They just happen. It's not the thing that happens, it's what you do with it, right? And we've all heard this. Is that's what the men in AA said. What are you going to do with this? Are you going to drink and kill yourself over it? Are you going to completely ruin your career? Because, by the way, one of the reasons that I was out of work at the age of 54 is it wasn't just being laid off, is that I had ruined my career through alcoholism, through dishonesty. I was fired from jobs. I did all these things, and I kept in my mind blaming the fact, well, if you had something like this happen to you, you would do this too. I used Paul as my excuse to fail over and over and over again. So the power of this, I think, for me personally, is just to finally realize all it took was letting Paul go and realizing that Paul didn't do these things because he wanted to. He did these things because he had to. I don't know why. I don't know why I got him for a brother. I don't know why he had brain damage. I don't know why those things happened, but they just happened. But as soon as I let him go, all these good things started to happen. And one after another, after another, after another. And finding the guys and then running into Tony and Mary and having them fund Blue Star. And then there's 1,000 other things that happen. And you said it, it's energy. We were pulling in good stuff, right? It's just one thing after another. It's all this positive, all the people, all the resources we needed just kept showing up. And all because, I think, because we changed our focus from what's wrong with everything to what's right with everything. Right? I mean, it sounds so stupid and simple, But I think what happens to most of us is we spend most of our lives staring at something that we don't like very much.
It's a changing perspective.
Yeah, that's it.
So,
And we find a spouse, we find something in that spouse that we don't like, and we focus on it until the little thing that we don't like is that big. And we find a job that we don't like, and instead of changing the job, we just let it, I learned a lot about where you put your attention, focus, and love is where you follow, right? It's like it's just so simple. But I had to, Janet will tell you this, I have to learn everything the hard way. If you had told me these things as a young man, I would have gone, yeah, whatever. I had to fall down, get up, fall down, get up, fall down, get up. And at the age of 54, be unemployed to the point of feeling like I was suicidal, and I had nothing. And like everything had to be taken away. We had almost nothing left. And because if I had had a good job, if we had had money, if we had had all those things, I would have been distracted from the thing that I was supposed to do. So not everyone has to go through this, I don't think, but I had to have everything taken away to where the slate was completely clean, nothing on it. And I have this visualization of God, I think what God is. God sort of sits there and goes, if you think you know, I'm not going to say anything. I'll let you go do it. You go do it. If you think you know all the answers, go do it. When you get to the point where you realize you don't know, just come and ask. And I came to that place where I said, God, I give up. I just give up. I can't get a job. I can't pay my bills. I hate who I am. I blamed this all on myself. But I had taken everything off of there, and I said, I will do anything you want me to do. And from that second, life got better. And it was slow. It takes little tiny steps, right? But Janet and I have been living this ever since that moment. Everything is just I've never seen anything like it. But most of us don't want to get to the point where we say, I quit. Because we think we know something, like, I'll fix it. And I'm smart, I know how to do it. I couldn't do anything. It's all backwards. Like all the things that we were taught, I think are wrong. The way you solve problems, so we were taught to overcome them, right? Like we're going to push our way through and solve all these things. And that's not what I've learned. I've learned that you have to surrender. I had to surrender when I got sober. Alcohol beat me. I had to actually say, I give up. I quit. I can't drink anymore, and I can't control my drinking anymore, so I surrendered. I had to surrender our marriage. One of the other things that I ruined, or at least I was part of ruining, was we ran our marriage into the same place. We had gotten to where we were thinking about getting divorced because it was the same thing. I thought I knew how to be a husband. She thought she knew how to be a wife, and we were making a mess of things. So we said, let's do the same thing with the marriage. Let's just say we don't know anything. Let's start over. And we walked out in the middle of the woods in New Mexico, and we hit our knees together in the middle of this forest, and we just said, and again, neither of us are religious, but we said, God, if there is a God, take this marriage. All we've done is screw it up. Please take this marriage and show us what you want, because it's a mess. It's horrible. And I, within the next couple of days, I woke up one morning and I looked across the breakfast table at Janet, and I fell back in love with her. And it wasn't romantic love. I actually got the interest. When I met her, I was intensely interested in who she was. She didn't have to be my wife or my girlfriend for me to be interested in her. I was actually interested in her. And I lost that somehow after being married 25 years and raising children and buying houses and all this stuff. I got it back by letting it go, by just saying, I don't know how to be a husband. I don't know how to do this. And I got the core thing back that I think that every good relationship needs, which is to love that person whether or not you're married to them or not, right? Because what happens to us, this is what happened to us, is as you marry long enough, your focus is so narrow, like how good of a provider or how good of a cook or how good, we start looking at each other so narrowly, and I had gotten to this point where all I found was things I didn't like, and did the same thing. So I had to throw all that out, and she had the same experience. We didn't arrive at that same place at the same time, and couples never do. It's usually one person first says, "Uh-oh, something's wrong," and kind of wave a flag, and then Janet said, no, we're fine. But then she started working on herself and then realized that, wait a minute, there's problems here. And again, that's the beauty of the guys in Alcoholics Anonymous said, forget about Janet, this is not about her, this is about you. Mm-hmm. They said, go find out what's wrong with you in this marriage. Fix that. Whether you stay married or not isn't the they don't even care. They go, but if you don't do this, all you're going to do is divorce Janet, go marry another one just like her, and repeat the same thing. And how many people do you know that do that over and over? Mm-hmm. And this is exactly so. Those guys taught me how to. They taught me how to.
Look inside of yourself.
Look in the mirror first. But it's so much easier to look at another person and go, oh, if you would only change, this thing would be so much better. That's not true. It's just not true. But it's easier to do that. And
it's easier to blame outside than to look on oneself.
And you lose all your power, right? Because if other people are to blame for everything in your life that's bad, then you don't have any responsibility or accountability to fix anything. You can always just say, well, as soon as they get better, I'll feel better. But so I bring all this up only because we have done this cycle with our financial life. We ran that into the ditch. It was spending more money than what we had, and mainly because I like to medicate using, like, if I can't use alcohol, buy things instead, right? And I got us into a lot of trouble, and so we had to go through that with our financial life. I had to do it with my career. I ran what was looking like a pretty promising career in my early 20s, to the point where at 54 I was unemployed. And so that's, I think, the other big lesson is that hitting bottom is not a bad thing. It's a springboard to the best thing. But no one wants to do it because it hurts. It's hard. And it's hard on your ego. It's hard on your ego when you're 54 years old and you go, I don't know how to go to work. I don't know how to get a job. I'm playing golf with men my age that have stocks and bonds and big houses and millions of dollars, and I'm sitting there feeling like I'm this tall because I don't have anything. And I didn't want to admit to anyone that I was in that spot. And so I think that's just what ends up happening to us when we sort of, I was taught to not show your weaknesses and not to surrender, not to admit that you're wrong about something. Those were my role models. Were that's not how you get a good life, right? And I'm sitting here with you, living the best life I've ever lived, ever, with someone that beyond having a relationship with another human being beyond anything I thought I'd ever have. It's impossible. And having enough money to live comfortably and have fun. That's impossible. It's impossible. My sister paid our rent 20 years ago, I'm sorry. 2004, we were out of work. I was out of work again, and I had to call my sister to pay our rent. So Blue Star, I'll wrap it up by coming back. I am the first person with a disability. And I say I have a disability. It wasn't diagnosed by a doctor, but I brought to Blue Star a man that was pretty messed up, and Blue Star changed me because I found what was right about me there. Right? Mm-hmm. I've done my very best work of my entire life in those 16 years. Just like Chris Garcia and Nathan Bryan, they've done their very best work they've ever done because I got a chance to find out how I tick and what I'm good at. And I tried to be something I wasn't up until that point. So.
And it was a part financially, but a success because it's very rare that company that give works mainly to people with autism or disabilities.
Europe is getting very good right now at providing services to people with disabilities, more and more services. So if you have a son or daughter with a disability, you can march them down to a government-funded office and get something. So we say that's better. And it might be better in the short term. And for some people with a disability who cannot work, absolutely. The problem is, just like in the United States, they're not stopping and saying, wait, before we put him in a program somewhere, let's find out if he wants to work and if he can work and what he's good at, what she's good at.
No.
They're not doing that. They're going from pity to charity and missing that opportunity to meet the real person.
Yeah. What did inspire you to move to Portugal? And what has been the biggest cultural difference between the United States and Portugal?
So somewhere around 2015, 2016, we started to be able to scrape together enough money to travel a little bit. And neither one of us had been to Europe. And we said, I was invited to speak in Scotland in 2016. So they paid for me to go there. And then all I had to do was pay for Janet to join me. So we got a chance to see Scotland. And that sort of hooked us on coming to Europe. And then we came back to Scotland. Oh, no, that's a year after that. So the next year, we said, let's go back to Europe for vacation. And Janet said, where do you want to go? I said, I have no idea. And we couldn't figure it out. And this is so weird. When I was little, Paul had a collection of coins and stamps. And all I remember was that he had a stamp or a coin, and I can't remember either which one it was, but it was from Portugal. And all I remember was that seemed so exotic to me. You know, where is Portugal? And I went to the world globe and found it, and I thought, oh, that would be so great. And then, of course, forgot all about it. And I told Janet, I said, I don't know why, but was it like Portugal just always seemed like a cool place to go. So we just went, let's go there. And then she did all the homework about where to visit here. So this was 2017.
It was our 40th wedding.
Oh, it was our 40th wedding anniversary. So we flew into Lisbon, and of course we did a Bill Morris vacation where we drove everywhere, tried to see the whole country in like 5 days or so. And we were pretty close. 10, yeah. We went from the Algarve all the way up to Porto, but we had a wonderful visit, and we something happened here. We just fell in love with it, and I want to know what it feels like to live in another country. And you've done that, so you know. And Janet looked at me. Well, I'll let you share that part.
So when Bill told me he wanted to actually move to another country, I did the thing that I usually do, which is say, there's no way. I said, we're not moving to another country. I've got my kids here, our granddaughter's here, our house is here, all these things and people are here. I'm not leaving. And I said, no. And so, true to Bill's form, he didn't let it die. And he kept bringing it up. And the more he brought it up, even though I didn't want to think about it, I started really thinking about it. And I thought, okay, what would be so bad about going? Because when he first brought it up, it was like, well, we could move for 2 years. Okay. And we didn't think about Portugal at the time. We were thinking about somewhere overseas. We had no idea where we wanted to go. And so the more I thought about it, the more interested I got in it. And I started reading, which is kind of what I do. I go online and I start reading about places and what it would be like and how much it would cost, because that's always a biggie for me. And the more I looked at it, the better it looked. And so I finally came to him one day and I said, I'm willing to look at it. And I said, where do you want to go? And he said, I want to move to Scotland. And I said, can't go there.
It's very cold in Scotland.
It is. That's what I said. I grew up in the sunshine, and I don't do well with gray skies. I said,
I grew up with the gray skies, so I know.
And I said, I couldn't do Scotland. I could not live there year round. Okay, where do you want to go? And I said, we've been to Portugal twice, and we fell in love with Portugal twice. I said, that would be my first choice. Mm-hmm. And so, Bill, to his credit, said, go for it, start looking into it. So I started looking into what it would take to come over here, and it's extensive. It was a lot more work than I thought it would be. There's a lot of paperwork. It's financially, at the outset, a little more expensive. It's much less expensive to live here than it is in the United States. And then there were all of the things about what are we going to do with the house? What are we going to do with the car? What are we going to do with all of our things? And, that was actually the best thing for me, because I've always liked to kind of hang on to things. So we finally decided that we were either going to rent out our house long-term or we were going to sell it. And I kind of didn't want to get rid of the house because our daughter had always loved coming there and our son liked to come there. And anyway, long story short, one day Bill was riding to work with our son Sam and said, yeah, we decided we're going to list the house, we're going to sell it. And he got kind of upset. He says, you're going to sell the house? And Bill says, yes. And he said, don't sell it yet. He says, let me go home and talk to my wife. So we didn't realize he wanted to live up there. He'd wanted to live in the town that we were living in for years. Mm-hmm. And he said, he called us up the next day and he says, I want to buy your house. So it's another one of the things, I put it very unromantically. It just fell in our lap. Sam just decided he wanted to buy our house. And so that problem was taken care of. Mm. And this sounds very crass the way I'm going to put it, but we didn't have, at the outset, we didn't have a lot of cash to spend. And my mother passed away, and I got an inheritance a small inheritance from my mother, and we used some of that money to be able to put together all of the paperwork that we needed and the first part of the immigration. So all of these things just fell into place, and it's kind of like we weren't sure that Portugal was the place we wanted to come, so we came over last April for a month and decided we were going to live here as locals to see if we liked it, to see what it would really be like. And we loved it. We fell in love with it all over again. And it's just everything in our life in the last few years, like Bill has said, since Blue Star, since whenever, all of these things have just fallen into place. We kind of, Bill calls it throwing up a flag. We throw up a flag.
No, a sail.
A sail.
Put your sails up.
We put our sails up, and we throw up our sails and say, okay, take us where you want us to go. And it was Portugal, and we love it here. And there have been challenges.
Yeah.
You asked the question about culture, and we really love the people. The people here are wonderful. But it's a foreign country, and the biggest thing for me is the language, because it's very, very difficult language.
I was surprised that here all the Portuguese speak English.
Yeah. The kids are taught
Different from Italy. That's
Much better than we thought.
A lot of them do. It's in the smaller villages, which we kind of prefer, that they don't speak English as much. And so, that's been a tough one for us. And it's kind of a matter of pride also. And we will learn.
Yeah.
We will.
It just all fit together, and my son and his wife are living where they're living their best life now ever. They're happier than they've ever been. They're living where they want to live, and this is something I also learned, which is if what happens benefits a lot of people, it's the right thing. I found that when I do things that just benefit me, they never work out. Mm-hmm. But this move has benefited Janet and I, has benefited Sam and Jessica, it's benefited Maddie, and this mutual benefit that everyone wins from something, right? And that really played out here. And we had a pink cloud when we got here. By the way, I was laughing at your videos that you sent, because we experienced this place the same way. The first week we were like, wow, walk on the beach, it's so pretty. And I call it the pink cloud. I'm on this pink cloud, and it was 3-4 months, and we were
more than that.
More than that. I mean, and every day Janet and I would just say, wow, this is so incredible.
Having lived in both continents, what do you think each could learn from the other in terms of social and political approaches?
The thing I remember the most about, we had exchange, not students, but business owners come to the United States and spent weeks and months with Blue Star. And then like Sam went to Russia on the exchange, reverse exchange. So we got a chance to talk to a number of Europeans about different things. And the thing that struck me was young men, because that's who usually I spoke to, their horizons here seem very fixed as compared to the horizons of a young man in the United States. And here's an example. 3 or 4 of the young men I talked to from Europe said, yeah, my wife and I are putting ourselves on a list to be able to either rent an apartment or buy an apartment. And I said, well, how long is that going to take? Well, it could take years. I said, what? And they said, yeah, we have, that's the way it's always been. And the more I got to talk to Europeans, that, again, younger couples and younger men, it seemed like it was very difficult to break out of the box they were born into. So not so much class anymore, but what's available. Like, if I go get this college degree, what can I do with it? And where can I work? And how much money can I make? And then where can I live? And it seemed like it was very hard to change your status here if you're a young person. This is just a perception. That may not be true, but it took a lot of work to change, to jump from here to here, because your family and it seemed
you mean in Portugal?
Yeah, it seems fixed. And in the United States, for example, my son doesn't have a college degree. And again, he's got the benefit of being related to me, but he's the CEO of a recycling company, and he's living a pretty good life. But my daughter and her husband are younger couples can pretty much choose how they want to live. If they want to live in a really, really nice home, or they want to live in a small apartment, or they want to live out in the middle of the woods. There's all these choices. You still have to go to work and do the things, but there's a huge range of choice, and you're not assigned a sort of a strata to do that within in the United States. You can go all over the place. And I just found myself, when talking to people here, that it just seemed like the movement was very narrow. I don't know if that makes sense, but if they made an adjustment to their life, it was pretty small. And it seemed like history is heavy, right? And the longer you live, this continent has so much history, it seems to me, that it's so heavy that younger people are...
It's like a burden you bring in your shoulder.
Yeah. I used to tell Janet, the reason there's so much graffiti on everything, the young people are telling us they don't value these big fixed edifices anymore. They don't help them. They don't benefit them. Yeah, the tourists like them, but they're disfiguring them to tell us something. I think there's a story in that, because in the middle of this city, you've got all this land that's taken by these. We're in Vienna. It's just block after block of historical buildings that have historical significance that are sitting empty. They're no good to anybody but tourist companies, right? They produce a little revenue for tourism. And I'm not saying get rid of them, but there just seems like that you guys are almost pushed to look backwards. And in the United States, we have the exact opposite. We always look forward. Now, the problem with that, and then I'll shut up, is we don't value any history. So if a building that had some historical significance is sitting where they want to build a McDonald's, they'll just tear it down. And it's sad, because we pave over parks. We do whatever we want to do today, we do. And here, they let buildings sit and the roofs come down and they sit for 100 years and nobody does anything with them, because the family hasn't decided what they want to do with the building. In the United States, that building would be sold and demolished and something new would go up immediately. So something in between, to me, seems like if we could slow down in the United States and value a little heritage, it'd be nice. And here, it seems like if you could maybe spend more time pointing forward and I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes. I think many people could benefit from your story about how to work with people with autism. And so thank you very much for the interview and your inspiring stories. Thank you, Bill and Janet.
You're welcome. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this amazing story of resilience and growth. I hope it inspired you as much as it inspired me. Stories like Bill and Janet's remind us of the transformative power of the courage to embrace change. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow the podcast for more incredible stories from around the world. Until next time, this is Ilaria Berenice, sharing stories that inspire and connect us all.